Well, when terrorists struck on 9/11, they knocked down the Twin Towers and also a sycamore tree near Ground Zero. To one best-selling author, that's not a coincidence. It's a warning. Hear why. That's next.
The stock market crash in 2008. The collapse of the American economy. The horrors of 9/11. Jonathan Cahn says these events were predicted thousands of years ago in the Bible.
Well, Jonathan Cahn is here with us, and my dear friend, your book, The Harbinger, just moved me. It moved millions of people to become a bestseller, and it touched you.
Why?
This verse in Isaiah was spoken when judgment was being assessed against Israel.
Yes.
What the Assyrians were going to invade.
Yes.
And this was their answer of it. It wasn't a faith thing. It was a rebellious thing.
The Harbinger, begins with the last days of ancient Israel, and this is a nation that had known God. I mean, you gave some stories here about what's happening in America right now, and it's very dramatic. And a nation that knew God turned away from God, and God warned them, and so he allowed this strike to happen on the land. And their response, instead of turning back to God, which was what he wanted, is they defy him. And there are 9 harbingers that appear in the land that are warnings of what will happen if it doesn't turn back to God. And
in Isaiah, they said, we will rebuild. And you pointed out how the leaders of our government, Tom Daschle and others, quoted this very scripture, said, we will rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, it's eerie, because if they had any idea what they were doing, they never would do it. And this is one of the harbingers, is that the leaders of the ancient land actually vow this vow. And so on the very day after 9/11, Tom Daschle from the Senate floor, or from the floor of Congress, says there's a word for America now. And out of his mouth comes the ancient declaration that pronounces judgment on a nation. And then John Edwards does the same thing. And then President Obama, in a paraphrase, without realizing what he's doing, does the same thing. I mean, it's eerie, and but it's exactly word for word, and that's the mystery. It's happening. And when they said that, when Daschle said it, he didn't realize he spoke of a tree. He didn't know there was an actual tree that fell down. He speaks about the stone that's going to go up. He didn't know that's actually going to happen. He's speaking of the harbingers, and it's happening, but he doesn't realize what he's saying.
There was a stone. Tell us about the stone.
Yeah, the stone in the book. It's the stone of judgment is the it's the fifth harbinger, and it goes right down the vow of Isaiah. Isaiah says they vow, we will rebuild with quarried stone. That's Israel after the attack. So here's what happens after 9/11. The people of New York go up to the mountains of New York. They quarry out this massive rectangular stone. It matches. It's called a biblical GAZIT stone. They bring it to the ground of destruction. This is the harbinger that has to be. They have a ceremony around the stone. American leaders vow vows of defiance over the stone. That instead of turning back, they defy him, and years later they will be destroyed. And this is a pattern in the Bible. And with America, we are now the nation that has known God, that is turning from God, and God is warning. And the same exact pattern, the scary thing or the amazing thing, is that the same 9 harbingers that appeared in the last days of ancient Israel are now reappearing on American soil. They're happening the same way, specifically beginning with 9/11, this warning strike, and now affecting everything. Some appeared in New York City, some have appeared in Washington, D.C., some have involved American leaders, some involved the President of the United States, and it affects everything, and it's specific. Without people realizing what they're doing. And then you have the sycamore. And the sycamore it says, Isaiah said this, they will rebuild. It says the sycamores have been cut down. So what it means is, this is the 6th harbinger of the book, that there has to be the striking down of a sycamore. It's a biblical sign of judgment, a national judgment in the Bible, the cutting down of the tree. It has to happen, it has to be linked to 9/11 or the attack. And so what happens in the last moments of 9/11, an eerie thing happens that the tower, as it's coming down, sends forth a shockwave, sends forth a beam into the air. It strikes an object. The object happens to be a tree. It happens to be a sycamore. The sycamore has fallen at the corner of Ground Zero. The people of New York, they put it on display. They make it a sign, and they call it the sycamore of Ground Zero. They think it's a great thing, and they don't realize this is the biblical sign of judgment. Everything in that verse, Isaiah, came true.
Well, they came and replanted, though, didn't they?
The next thing is right down the line. The sycamores have fallen, and the people of Israel says, well, we will plant cedars in their place. The biblical word is EREZ tree. It can be a cedar, can be a spruce. But they're, again, an act of defiance, saying, we're going to come back stronger, so God, you're not going to humble us. We're going to put a stronger tree here. And so what happens? The seventh harbinger is 2 years after 9/11, a tree appears in the sky. It's at the corner of ground zero.
Right.
It's being lowered down into place, into an exact place to replace the sycamore. This is an act. This is the act what they did in ancient Israel. It puts it down, and they call it the tree of hope. They have a ceremony around the tree. They say, this is a tree of nothing's going to stop us. And the tree is a biblical EREZ tree, the same tree of the Hebrew of Isaiah 9:10. They have no idea what they're doing. Nobody's planning this.
An EREZ is like a conifer?
It's a conifer tree, or panache tree, yes, and it can be a cedar, it can be a spruce, and that's exactly what it was. Exactly what it was. Everything that was there, and there's another one. I'll tell you, I'll throw in that. In the Bible, one of the signs of national judgment we spoke about is the tree. And God says, this tree, you're going to wither. It talks about a nation withering, or he says, I'm going to cut off the branches of the tree. So it's a biblical sign. Well, there is one of the harbingers is this tree of hope at ground zero.
Yeah.
And what has happened, this was a symbol of America. Well, what happened to that harbinger? If you go there, I went back. The tree of hope is withering away. Withering away. Withering away. They can't stop it from withering away. They literally, if you go there, the branches they're cutting off the branches. It's being held up by ropes. Everything around it is green, but the tree is withering, and everything right next to the tree is withering away. They can't do that. A sign of a nation that spiritually is withering. I mean, and while America is saying we're going to get stronger, without coming back to God, it's withering. And there is one of the harbingers is the tower, at ground zero. Yeah. And, and that was, with Israel, the sign was that, hey, they said, we're going to rebuild higher, bigger, stronger, but without God. And it takes the form of the tower. In an ancient translation called the Septuagint, when they first translated the Bible, they did a strange thing with Isaiah 9:10. They said, the bricks have fallen. It said, but come let us build for ourselves a tower. They literally said a tower. So that a tower is going to rise on the ground of destruction. The nation's going to do this. That's exactly what's happening in New York City. This is the harbinger that's continuing to go up. It's happening. And the idea is higher, bigger, stronger. Now, they got that verse when they said, come let us build for a tower. Yeah. The rabbis got it from the Tower of Babel. And so they're linking the Tower of Babel to Isaiah 9:10. That's what they did. Okay. Now, I don't know if you know, I found out since I wrote the book that actually there was a scripture in the ruins of ground zero. There was a scripture embedded in the ruins of ground zero.
No, I didn't know that.
I didn't either. And this is after a book. And it was a photographer got it. It was a charred Bible, and there was one page left. He took a picture, was whisked out. He looked at it, started weeping. And it was right there where they're going to build the tower. The scripture was, come let us build for ourselves a tower.
And that's the Tower of Babel.
That was the Tower of Babel, and the only other place it appears in the ancient translation is Isaiah 9:10, the scripture of the harbinger in there. And so here, this tower has been going up. It's been going up, and it only this year it broke through and it became the tallest building in New York. It broke through, and that's the whole point of it. And the day it did, and there was a tension on this tower, it became the biggest thing. It was April 30th. In the Harbinger, that's the date given for the mystery of ground zero. April 30th is in the Harbinger. And the president, Pat, this is 6 months 6 months after the book came out when we were here. Yeah. The president came to ground zero, and they showed him a beam. This is in the summer. And they showed him a beam. It's going to be the final beam of the tower. And they said, write words on the beam. Now, you know that in the book, as the third witness, he gives this paraphrase. And the way to sum up Isaiah 9:10 in our language is simply two. We will rebuild, number one, and we'll come back stronger. He writes on the beam, we rebuild, we come back stronger. On the beam, the highest words in America, crowning the tower.
And the president wrote those words.
He wrote the very words. And when my wife told me this, I didn't believe her. Yeah. And when I looked at it, it's going to be the highest thing in America. It's going to be the highest. It's the words. It's paraphrase of Isaiah 9:10. And in the ancient Hebrew, when they made this vow that brought destruction, it's 8 Hebrew words. Isaiah 9:10. 8 Hebrew words. The president added 2, so he put 8 English words, matching the 8 Hebrew words of Isaiah on the tower. Yeah, and the central word of both is rebuild, in both the fourth word of, I mean, it parallels exactly. It's uncanny. And
this is unbelievable. John, what comes next? Is there the what do you think?
Well, I was watching the show from the background, and it is clear, America right now, as the mainstream culture, is still turning rapidly from God, the culture.
That's right.
And as long as it does, if it does, the pattern is there will be shaking and shaking, and until America either returns to God, there's revival, or there is calamity or destruction. And I believe, I mean, people say, is there hope? You know, and I believe if there was no hope, there wouldn't be any harbingers. What's the point of warning if there's no hope? And one of the things we talked about last time was this mystery ground, that the mystery of ground zero goes back to this place where America was dedicated to God, and that's where it came. The message is return and come back. And there's something strange. I mean, that the Harbinger, I mean, this year was a real tipping point, I think, in many ways. And yet the Harbinger came out. So I believe that there's this parallel and that there's a warning, but God is calling. And it's the key is, if my people. I mean, because if we were the salt of the earth we were supposed to be, America wouldn't be as such. If we were the light, it wouldn't be as such. And so the thing is that it's if my people, and the call goes out. And that's why I believe this is going out now. We have to turn to God. We have to be the lights as never before. If it's getting darker, the lights have to get brighter. I mean, we have to get more radical. But this is the time, and this is the reason. There is hope, but the hope is only in Yeshua. You know, in Hebrew, the word for, people say, how can I be safe? Should I build a bomb shelter? In Hebrew, the word for safety is Yeshua. And Yeshua is Jesus. Whose only hope is Jesus. That's it.
Brother, I just thank God for you and for the work you've done. Ladies and gentlemen, The Harbinger, we mentioned before, it's a national bestseller, 1 million copies. This is the Harbinger Companion Jonathan has put together to give you a little bit more insight. It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. God is speaking to our nation.
And the harbingers are the beginning. It's not the end. It's the beginning of the shaking of America. And then the next part of it, if you follow what happened to Israel, the next part is that there was a second shaking because they defied God. So God said, well, there's going to be another one. Well, what comes after is the economic shaking of America. We're still in the shadow of it. And it happens with the collapse. And it opens up a whole other stream of biblical mysteries, and one of them I could just touch is the Shemitah. And the Shemitah is that every 7 years in Israel, it was kind of like an economic wipe away, you know, as a blessing. But what happened is at the end of it, on this exact one day called Elul 29, all the nation's debts are wiped out, the accounts are wiped out, all wiped away, and as a blessing. But as the nation turned away from God, the Shemitah turns into a sign of judgment. Jeremiah says that's actually God uses that as the timing of judgment. Well, what's it have to do with America? You have the first shaking, 9/11. You have the second shaking, the economic collapse. Well, the Shemitah is always 7 years apart. It's a 7-year thing. So when did the collapse of the American economy happen? Happened 7 years after 2001. In September, 7 years to the month of 9/11. It happened the second week of September. That's 7 years to the week of 9/11. And the greatest day of this collapse was the end of September, the greatest collapse in American history, period. Greatest collapse. When did it take place? It took place on Elul 29, the exact day appointed in the Bible for the wiping away of a nation's financial accounts as a sign of judgment of a nation that has turned away from God.
Let's repeat. This is the exact day, the Elul?
The exact day and the exact hours. And it's the exact hours that happened. And not only that, and if you go back 7 years, because it's a 7-year mystery, you find 2001, you have the other greatest collapse in American history up to that day. Happened after 9/11. And when did that collapse take place? It took place on the exact same Elul 29, the day of appointed to wipe away a nation's financial account. And they happened exactly 7 Hebrew biblical years apart to the day, to the hours, the 2 greatest collapses up to those days. And it wasn't just on any day. It only comes once every 7 years. They both happened on the exact once in 7 year.
Well, we are having the greatest financial problem in the history of this nation. I mean, there's nothing like it. I mean, the amount of debt is so insupportable. It's not just America, it's the whole world. There's no way out of it.
Yeah, which is also, I mean, that you just brought up something that's another sign in the Bible. It speaks, it says, if you're blessed, you follow me, you're going to lend to many nations. If you turn away from me, you're going to be in debt. We went from the greatest creditor nation to the greatest debtor nation, just in the same way as we are moving away from God. And
God bless you. I don't know, Sheriff, you got something to top that? Oh, we're going to have a break. I'm speechless. What's next?